Welcome to the Hospitality Show. This is Sam-Erik. I'm here with my co-host Abid. Hi, Abid.
How are you, Sam? Good morning or good afternoon to whatever part of the world you're joining us. Great to be back with you this morning, my time. Very early morning, my time.
Well, it's great. I'm really excited about. I think I'm going to have a great show. We have some real experts in the field of sustainability relating to tourism. I'm really excited to see who our guests are today, and also that we have a chance to answer some questions that you, the viewer, hopefully will give us. I think this is a chance for you. It's not only us asking questions, but it's also your opportunity to give comments or ask. And so the way you do it, and you just go to the comment. If you're on LinkedIn, go in those comments and ask the question, give your feedback. And we love to have some social currency. So that means lots of thumbs ups and hearts and applause or whatever you can think of. That will help us to tap LinkedIn on the shoulders so that their algorithm will lift us up a little bit higher. So all that is appreciated. So before we get started, I just want to invite all of you who are watching this live and also the replay viewers to subscribe. If you're on YouTube, just press subscribe and press the notification bell, and you will be notified next time we are live, because we are live again this week again. But also when you're on LinkedIn, we have a group page called Hospitality Talks, so please join us over there. And for our Facebook friends, just subscribe and join us every time we are live, because we have a great lineup of shows coming up. So I hope you can join us every time and anytime. So over to you, Abid.
Thank you, Sam. Indeed, this is going to be a wonderful show. The topic is very apropos to the current environment. I think with the pandemic, all of a sudden sustainability is front and center in most of the conversations. We've got a fabulous panel lined up. So without any further ado, I think I'm going to bring in Stewart Moore, who's the founder and CEO of EarthCheck. Welcome to Hospitality Talks, Stewart.
Wonderful to be with you all here this evening.
Superb. Well, I know it's late in the evening for you, being on the opposite end of the world, but thank you for joining us, Stewart. I know you've been involved in sustainability efforts for a long time. Just walk us through sort of the origins of this conversation. How did it begin? And what does it look like moving forward, Stewart?
Look, I think that's a very good question. Sustainability as a discussion has been with us for a long time, but sometimes it doesn't feel like that. And I get enormously frustrated going to industry forums and facilitated workshops with boards and executive teams and having a discussion on, do you think we should be addressing sustainability and should we take action? So the reality is it goes back. The first global call to arms on sustainability was the Rio Earth Summit. That was 1982. So that's just 1992. So that's just under 30 years of discussion we've been having. And we forget that the Agenda 21 from the summit was a 350-page document with 40 actions, very specific in terms of what we needed to do to address sustainability in the planet. And of course, after Agenda 21, we went to the 8 Millennium Goals in 2000, and now we have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of 2015. So a lot of discussion. And the reality is probably we haven't come as far as I'd like to have thought we could have in that period of time. One part of me is always about celebrating our successes, and I think there have been some fantastic successes in the industry. And the other part of me is about the honesty in saying, well, you know, we could be doing a lot better than we are doing, particularly in terms of reducing our footprint. But I think we're in now the blue economy. It's a very exciting time for sustainability, given what we now understand what we can achieve.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that update. 30 years in the making, and I hope that we continue to have very active conversations, because we really do have to protect this planet. There is only one of these planets, and we got to leave it better than how we found it. So let's talk about the industry that is near and dear to all of our hearts. Let's talk about sustainability efforts in hospitality. When did hotel companies start to adopt some of these practices, and when did the conversation begin in lodging and hospitality industry?
So I guess if we talk about the Rio Earth Summit being 92, in 94, there were a whole range of green schemes were brought into existence, many of which still exist today. And they were very much tick box, well-intentioned schemes about what we should be doing to address sustainability. But industry was well and very active very early, right back to Scandic. And the Scandinavians were doing fantastic things in terms of their metrics and their assurance. So the industry has been active, but the reality is, I guess the best way to explain it, it's virtually like the old bell-shaped curve. So we've got a number of leaders that have always been there, and we'll talk about some of those this evening. Six Senses being one of them, banyan trees. There are a lot of operators who had a very strong vision for what they wanted to achieve. There's a very big part of the industry that sits in the middle, are well-intentioned operators that promise a lot, but in fact aren't doing as much as they could be doing. And then I think there's quite a tail of laggards which haven't done much action we need to bring forward. So the industry is spread-eagled, and it has been, I can promise you, that bell-shaped curve has been with us, Abid, for the better part of the 30 years. Sustainability has risen in terms of awareness, but the action still needs to be pushed.
So, I would have thought, quite candidly, by now, most of the people recognize the importance of these efforts, and most of the people would be adopting these practices, and it's a common thing in everyday operations. Help us understand, Stewart, what are some of the hurdles? Why is it that we have gained grounds that we have, and we should celebrate those successes, but what can we do to move forward faster, better? What's holding us back?
So I guess at one level, we've got to understand that the infrastructure we're dealing with, there's a lot of very old, antiquated infrastructure. You can't move it, and it needs investment. You've also got the age-old discussion, and it's a difficult discussion between an asset owner's perspectives on how an asset should be managed versus a franchisee's expectations in terms of what they should be doing versus a manager. So you've still got a little bit of discussion going about who's responsible for making the investment. Return on investment is always a discussion for any owner and asset manager. And the reality is your marketplace, the consumer have now moved from an interest to an awareness in terms of what should be happening in market. So market knows it should be doing things, but the reality is it does require investment, and it requires probably most significantly three key elements. A strong element, which is about the vision for the organisation, what it wants to achieve. It needs to have strong values, and they need to sit within brand. So my discussion always with every company is, if it's not core to brand, you're not serious. If it's not core to the KPIs of the CEO, you're not serious. So it really comes back to getting the basic fundamentals right, and the rest should follow naturally. But we've got a little bit of way to go to make those things happen.
Well, that's terrific. And again, quite candidly, I had always said to all of my colleagues that no matter what it is, we have to be able to plan it. We have to set targets. We have to measure whether we hitting those targets. And that goes for a simple thing. Well, maybe not so simple thing. If I want to lose weight, I step on scale every single day, hoping that I've lost weight. And that holds true for anything we want to accomplish. Stewart, help us understand maybe three top accomplishments in the industry that we should all be celebrating and we should all be very proud of. Where is it that we have gained the most ground?
Well, you're going to hear a little bit of discussion about this tonight, but probably one of the things that tourism specialised in was waste. We create a lot of waste, a lot of food waste. And it's just been so good to see the war on waste, particularly plastics and particularly food waste. So there's been enormous advancements, but late in the piece in terms of waste. We're doing a lot of very good things with new technology options for energy. The revolution in solar paneling and green roofs in the design of buildings has come a long way, and that's part of the blue economy. So we know the blue economy is about innovation in entrepreneurship and disruption. So we're now in a disruptive phase, which is now saying, well, why aren't you doing this? And probably the other key thing is more about the social dimension, is people, the role that people play and staff play in sustainability. So two bits of it. We're only as good as our staff in managing our assets, and we need to support them and train them and give them an ownership of it. And the other thing in the industry, which I think we're only just starting to now appreciate, is the role of the consumer, and that the role that they can play in terms of things like water, waste and energy when they're travelling.
Well, and I'll turn it over to Sam here in a bit, but before I do, Stewart, particularly in luxury lodging, luxury establishments, the general thought process has been, well, you can't really do it because these are luxury consumers. They pay a lot of money. So you can't be implementing recycling programs or reuse programs. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I think the market's changing. I think it's quite a sophisticated market. It's actually sometimes less is more. So sophisticated travellers now know they don't need all of the plush surroundings. They're quite happy, particularly in the environment we're going into. They want health, they want safe environments, wellness is a core part of the experience, and that whole issue of experience. They want to actually have the experience of good food, locally grown. I think the discussion is moving, and I think people are very much aware of the issues you talked about right at the beginning, the significance of saving the planet, and that they have a role to play in that. And I think that's a part of storytelling, and that's what the good hotel groups do. They bring you along in that journey. You become part of the outcome.
And do you see a generational gap? Do you think that the sustainability efforts are being adopted more so possibly in millennials than they were in boomers? Or do you think it's just that we are better aware of it and everybody is carrying out some of these initiatives?
I think we've had sea change. I think we've had a rise of awareness, which we talked about before. Everyone now knows we should be doing it, but I do think it's the more recent generation that's taken up the need to take action, and I think that's the future. We've got to bring these people online, and to be honest about it, we've also got now reporting expectations to share markets and to asset owners we didn't have before. So we've had a maturity now in terms of what's required in market, and now we have a passion. So we've got evangelists there who now know that we should be doing the right thing. And you've had the work of Greta Thunberg last year, bringing a whole generation of kids along in the context of how we should be travelling.
Well, Greta has done an absolutely incredible job of heightening the awareness. It is just fabulous to see that generation is that actively involved in it and really, truly concerned about it. So thanks for bringing that up. Stewart, I'm going to turn it over to Sam. I'll be back with you in one moment. Sam, over to you, please.
Thank you, Abid. Stewart, great to listen to your thoughts on sustainability. I understand that Earthtech is doing also research and also interested about the opportunity that has been identified and the challenges that are likely to impact the tourism industry. Could you share some of your thoughts about that research that Earthtech is maybe coordinating in this process? I think we don't hear.
Stewart, I don't know if you heard Sam-Erik.
Your microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
Yep, there you
Perfectly.
go. Thank you.
I'm not too sure what happened there. Look, I think, Sam, we've done a lot of work, particularly on the basics, the use of water and waste, the pricing of those assets in communities. Almost the perfect correlation we found between water and energy. And some people ask, well, how could that be the case? But we know what we do with water, we heat it, cool it, push it, and we draw it. And so they are all energy-based things. So a lot of the work has just been finding the correlation and the connection points between how we better manage assets within a property, and more particularly in design. So we have our own building planning and design standard, and the whole essence of that standard is being able to design in for operational performance. And I think that's probably the most exciting thing we've been doing over the last 5 years, is understanding that you can actually design for operational performance, which means you're getting something that you know needs to be delivering for you in terms of your bottom line.
And that's excellent. And how about the education aspects of passing on the knowledge and educating the particular hotels and the tourism industry? What are your vehicles to handle this education?
Yeah, I think education is critical. Abid talked about it before.
Stewart, your microphone is, we don't hear you.
Right, so look, education's critical. One of the things we have done is develop an educational program for children, and it was piloted in Singapore, because what we know is the future, and Abid talked about it before, is about children and the role they play, particularly in educating their parents, but they are the future of the world. But we've also developed programs for universities, particularly for the managers of the future. And we've developed a program at the moment that in Purdue, which enables students to take our metrics and our performance measures and apply them to real life situations. So the key part of me is enabling the young managers to actually have an understanding of sustainability before they reach the assets.
Okay, that's very good. I've been around the block, worked for a number of hotels over the years, and I share your sentiment about the challenges there are, particularly with the older hotels, and that they're not really up to snuff about developing sustainable standards, even though the operator or if it's owner operator that is trying to do that. Now, of course, it's prestigious in a way because of the demands from the consumer, that you have a label that identify that you are a sustainable operation, but it also can be used as just a sticker on the hotel. So I'm just kind of wondering what kind of a watchdog, or what are the kind of tools you have to keep them intact, that in fact what they are preaching is holding true, or do you leave that to the consumer to raise their voice?
No, I think you're making a very good comment there. So, and we talked about it earlier, you can't manage what you don't measure. So it must be based on proper metrics. It has to be evidence-based. All of our standards, in fact, are audited. So we have third-party auditors that are independent from the company. And that's the best way to do it. So we validate that the information is correct, and it also is validated that what happens on site and is reported is actually happening. So you can't leave it to the consumer. And look, one of the big dilemmas we face as an industry, there are 250 green stamps, okay? And there's a bit of ambiguity and there's a bit of confusion. And I think we've now got consumers, and I say this to all of our operators, you've got a very smart consumer now who's going to ask you questions, and they're going to want to see that it's being delivered on site. And the best way to know that's happening is you've got third-party auditors checking.
Yeah, and I think particularly now with the pandemic, people are extra cautious, even though it's relating to cleanliness, and hotels say, well, we have the cleanest rooms. Well, then the question is, what did you do before? So I'm sure there are some issues about that. But I really appreciate your feedback, and I'm going to give back to Abid to ask a few more questions.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks, Stewart. Just continuing on with our conversations, how will these efforts change, or are they changing when we're dealing with this pandemic?
Yeah, I think we're in the new normal, and I think the new normal is going to be a very close relationship between health, safety, and hygiene. So hygiene, health and safety were always a part of sustainability. They're not new concepts. They're always a part of looking after the asset, was a core part of certainly the EarthCheck standard. But the whole essence of hygiene now is that it needs to be mapped right across each of the supply chains and right throughout the property. So we're going to find a lot more use of digitisation, low touch, right through the asset, starting at, in fact, when you start travelling right through to where you get to the hotel. So the new normal is going to be quite dramatically different. And you know what? It's going to be with us for some period in time. I wish I could say that COVID is going to be a quick response and delivery, but you know what we've always had? We've always actually had a flu season, and we'll continue to have flu seasons after this. So the issue's not going away. We need to manage it.
Well, I think one of the positive outcomes, if you want to look at the silver lining, I understand during this pandemic when there was a shutdown all over the world, places like Los Angeles, Beijing, New Delhi, where the pollution was just terribly bad. The pollution is far less at this particular point, but so maybe it was Mother Earth's way to give it a little bit of time to breathe, because certainly, some of these areas were badly polluted. So any major concern areas as we move forward, Stewart, and any geographical focus from your point of view, since you have a macro view of all the efforts that are being put forth?
So the first thing is we had 19 years of steady growth. I mean, how amazing is that for an industry sector? So there always had to be a time for realignment, and that realignment is now. And prior to COVID, we had over-tourism and we had a lot of stress on destinations. So the positive of that is we've now recognised we need to do this better in terms of managing things. And the other flip side is it's almost back to the future. So we're back to embracing domestic tourism, and we're back to actually embracing domestic experiences. So there are a lot of positives in terms of how we need to manage the industry. A lot of negatives, of course, in terms of how we get people back employed back into the industry. So look, I guess the reality is technology is with us. There are so many good options now in how we build, the materials we're using in green roofs, in microgrids and precincts, and the part that tourism can play a very core role of that in the visitor economy. So moving forward, I do think there are positives in terms of the new technology and the awareness. But I think our recovery is going to be a little longer than perhaps we may have thought initially.
Fair enough. A lot of these technologies, Stewart, do they work in emerging markets? Can you deploy these technologies, or are these tools primarily meant for mature markets?
Yeah, I think it's a very good comment. Do you know, we often have a discussion with our owners that how about we just do the basics? Let's not be too complicated. So, and the basics start with, can you actually measure your water and energy on site? You would be so surprised to understand how many buildings have no metering systems. I mean, these are very simple things that can be done. So we don't have to get too complex about it. Get some measurement in between zones so that we can understand where your footprint is and the impact that it has. And that gives us an ability to start both measuring and managing where we need to put our most effort. So we don't have to be overcomplicated in this. We can achieve between 6 and 10% improvement in performance by training staff. And why would that be the case? Because we know the foot soldiers of sustainability are cleaners. They're the people that turn the lights off, flush the toilets, use the chemicals. And we often know that, in fact, you might have good equipment, but sometimes it's not being effectively used. So you can do the simple things. It doesn't have to be high investment on rooftops and high technology.
Fair enough. Stewart, one last question, and then I'll bring up our next guest. But what's hot? What's the new trends in sustainability?
I think there's some exciting things happening in green finance, in green bonds, in green loans. So you've got a whole capitalisation options for sustainability and renewables happening, particularly with superannuation funds. I'm very excited about what's happening with solar energy and the fact that you can paint solar panels now onto buildings. There is so much that we can do. You can have energy positive buildings. We can give back. So we're going to hear a lot more about regenerative tourism, not just sustainable tourism. There's the whole context of circularity. These issues are going to be the future, and they're happening right before our eyes. So I think we're in for some very exciting times in terms of new builds, but also the ability to refresh and refurbish.
Superb. Well, thank you for that, Stewart. Please stay with us. We will get back together. At this particular point, I would like to bring our next speaker, Michael Kwee, who's the Managing Director of YKnot Sustainability. Michael, welcome to Hospitality Talks. Michael, are you there?
Apologies. Yeah. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Sorry about that. I was so intent on listening to Stewart that I forgot to unmute myself.
No worries. It certainly happens. I think we are just in this mode. So thank you for joining us, Michael. I know it is evening time for you as well. Help us understand your involvement and the lens that you are using in monitoring sustainability in hospitality industry.
Well, so in terms of YKnot sustainability, what we do is we help companies map out and how to strategize and put a plan forward in terms of sustainability. So I guess that kind of comes in a number of different areas. Talking with companies who are interested, typically will be, one of the first places they'll always look is energy, carbon, that type of a thing. That one kind of is one of the longer standing kind of hot button ones. Then, a bit more of the advanced ones will start thinking about water and how that kind of maps in. And as Stewart was mentioning, energy and water being very tightly interconnected. And then I think ultimately the exciting part is when you start getting people talking about what they're doing in terms of their waste, how they're looking at that, because to be honest, energy is sexy. Solar panels, as Stewart pointed out, solar panels are damn sexy. Clean water is super sexy. You go snorkeling, it's fantastic. Clean water is great. But then you start getting into waste, and it's not just not sexy, it's stinky, it's smelly, it's gross, but it's exciting what you can do with it.
Well, Michael, I mean, leave it to this panel to paint such a wonderful picture on sustainability and on waste. I don't think I would have ever looked at dealing with waste as excitingly as you are doing. And thank you for doing that, because you are right. Even from a business modeling point of view, the utilities, there is a major cost involved in it, so you can get people's attention. Waste is sort of the byproduct of all the sexy things that happen in a hotel. And by then, people are in and have had a great time and they're gone. So it's out of sight, out of mind. What sorts of things are we doing to get people's attention and the impact, environmental impact from waste?
Well, I think a lot of the leaders, what they're doing is not so much going out there and putting up a storyboard or shouting and screaming about, the waste and all of that. It's more of something that is exciting because people are looking at that. The leaders have looked at that and said, look, this isn't sexy. This is something we have to do. One of the people I respect the most in terms of the field of waste, Pete Van Ziel, he had a great way of saying it, that part of the problem when you think about waste is you're thinking about it, throwing it away. And his point is there is no away. When you're throwing it, what you're doing, you're just throwing it away. You're basically polluting, as opposed to trying to reduce, not taking that in the first place, not getting rid of it, not throwing it over your shoulder, but looking at, as Stewart was kind of alluding to, the life cycle of it. So in that sense, that's kind of the key. Changing your mindset that it's not throwing it away, it's actually you're polluting.
And I think that's a terrific way to look at it, because away again implies out of sight, out of mind. It gets picked up, it goes somewhere else, no longer my headache, and I don't have to deal with it. But when you look at it from a point of view that it indeed is adding to the pollution, maybe we'll be a bit more cautious as to how we deal with it. Talk a little bit about the biggest sources of waste. I know there is organic waste in lodging and hospitality. There is solid waste, and there is liquid and wastewater type of stuff. But what component is the largest contributor?
Well, looking at it, again, from a life cycle kind of view, by far the biggest generator of waste are two things: initial construction, and renovation. Now, operators don't have that much control over those aspects of it. That is a bit more on the developers and the teams that are doing the construction. But then when it comes into operations, typically it seems to be most resorts are struggling with food waste. Garden waste as well, in terms of the large resort areas, especially villa complexes and things like that. Then after those two kind of areas, it seems to be one of the bigger ones then gets into packaging waste. And I think this was touched on a lot in the past couple of years, when all the push about bottled water, single-use bottles of water. Thankfully, the tide has started to change on that. So we're no longer getting these plastic bottles swirling around the ocean, washing up on beaches. But a lot of hospitality is really embraced using refillable glass bottles, in terms of what you can do with that, and then handing them out to the staff that can use that for drinking during the day, as opposed to the plastic bottles. Then I guess tying into kind of the renovation would be a bit more of the micro renovation in terms of the turnover in your linens, your uniforms, your towels, your bed sheets, all of that. Those get replaced a lot more than, say, your beds, air conditioning, all of that type of a thing, but not so much as the food waste. So those are some of the kind of the key areas. We're kind of separating out the wastewater because there's a separate stream that would typically handle that, except for in, say, island environments and more rural locations that need to have their systems all in one place to be able to kind of handle that. They need to be their own kind of cities in the middle of nowhere to handle all of that process.
Well, you are correct. We're only talking about lodging as one of the business sectors, but to be honest, in a lot of the mature and emerging economies, waste management still continues to be a major issue. I know in one of the cities that I lived at a few years ago, though they had recycling and the constituents were asked to separate the waste, but there was an expose that was found out that the waste management company at the end was combining it all and dumping it into the landfill, which was really, really disappointing. So there is still a lot of work to be done. Talk to us about some of the challenges. What can we do in better managing waste and managing it sustainably? And I'm going to turn it over to Sam here in a little bit, but if you wouldn't mind telling us how can we manage it better, and what are some of the challenges?
Well, I guess one of the key challenges, and Stewart touched on it a bit earlier, is that waste is not typically a direct cost. So your utilities, your energy and your water, you you stick something into the wall, you turn a faucet, and out comes what you need. Waste typically will be a flat fee that you pay, and somebody comes and collects it. There might be a variance for large amounts or extraordinary kind of amounts, but it's not typically something that you're, tied into a per usage thing. And that sense, tied in with the, throw it over the shoulder kind of mindset, is that it's just there and it's not monetized and you can't save money and you can't do anything really about it. It's hard to measure. To be honest, the number of places that would actually have some type of metric and measurement weighing your waste at the trash area, at the dumpster place, is surprisingly low, and it's frighteningly low. So what you were talking about earlier, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. There's this inbuilt way of thinking of that process that doesn't actually measure it. So it then starts coming down into, if you don't have a scale at your waste collection area, how do you measure it? You've got a container. How full is it? How often does it get taken out? Getting an idea, a general idea, even an estimation, will help you start looking at it. As you were mentioning earlier in the call, if you want to lose weight, stepping on a scale is the right way to do it. But if you don't have a scale, you can look and you can take some anecdotal notes like, oh, I've got this extra bit of spare tire around my waist, and it seems like it's some amount. And over time after jogging, I realize it's maybe not that big. So anecdotally, you can use that as a way to cross that bridge to get to the point where you're actually measuring it and then putting in those hardcore ways of taking that approach.
I think, sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I guess one of the other difficulties, and Stewart alluded to it a bit earlier, is the complexity of it, the logistics, that you have stuff coming in, then you do something with it, you monetize it, then you have a section of it that goes out. So all of that kind of has a bit of it's not as direct as, you turn on a light, you get your energy, end of the month, you get the bill, you pay the bill, and you're done with it. It's about all of those different things. And even worse is kind of the packaging. What is the right amount of packaging on any material? I'd feel pretty comfortable in saying that, maybe up until 15 years ago, nobody was getting it right. We're making a lot of progress in that, but you still see, shrink-wrapped vegetables that might be delivered on a daily basis to a hotel is the ultimate form of waste. Not only material waste, you've got the plastic that's only using for a little bit of time, but also process waste. That supplier has to wrap it all up, package it, bring it over. Then as soon as it's received, the team that's receiving it has to unwrap it and put it into a separate storage area and all of that type of a thing. So, looking at waste in terms of that, material as well as processes is kind of one of the best ways of looking at it.
Terrific. Even in the designs of these facilities, waste management kind of is not even thought of. Waste collection might be an area designated, but waste management is not even thought of actively. So we've got to get better at it if we truly want to reduce waste, and it's going to be in the entire cycle of supply and consumption that would help. So stay with us, Michael. I'm going to turn it over to Sam, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Sam, over to you, please.
Thank you, Abid. So I'm wondering now, because it's a quite complex issue that we are talking about, and with your clients, what are the can you maybe share your strategy how to redefine a paradigm or way of thinking about waste that maybe your clients would not have thought about? Just give maybe some taste of how you go about with the discussion with your clients.
Well, I guess it's always something. Look, if you talk about waste as the first thing you're asking somebody to do, their first step in sustainability, it's really you're shutting yourself out. You're not really going to go very far. It's like going on a date and saying, "Oh yeah, my breath smells bad." That's your opening line. You're setting yourself up for failure. So it's about kind of setting that tone, talking about the overview of it. Okay, so setting that vision. What does your brand stand for? What are the opportunities where you can provide a more authentic experience, where you can protect the asset that you've invested in, you can protect the destination, you can protect the infrastructure that you've built and paid to build. How do you fill all of that together? Now, you do need to give clients a way that is, they can't do all of them. Not all of them can do all of the things at the same time. So it's kind of helping to prioritize. And it's not necessarily something that, an external person is best at prioritizing on their own, working in a silo. It needs to be an engagement process about, okay, so what are the key things for you? What do you see? What are the aspects of sustainability that already exist in your business? Because all businesses have an aspect of that. So it's about finding that and then helping to set that path that you can, meet your goals, but then also say, okay, so you've met these targets. What are the next targets that you need to meet? And, with so many of the technological advances in power, 10 years ago, CFLs and LED lights were a hard sell. Now it's just a no-brainer. People will do them. Now water is an easier sell. So those are easier to go along. So you'll be able to paint an easier picture, and then lead that way with waste, talking about, your solid waste, how you're losing money in terms of you're processing too much of it. You're reducing your return on the gross floor area because you've got this huge space where you're storing stuff because the guy who comes and collects it maybe does it every 2 days. All of that type of a thing, into monetizing it and to looking at how you can have an overarching approach that actually weaves together and sets that tone, and it's not missing things out. Waste is one of the things that's being missed out, and it's talking about how to bring this to light, and that engagement process.
Excellent. For the viewers, if there's nothing else that they remember from the entire show, can you give sort of your top tips about best practices for waste management that you think it would help them to come a long way, much better than they're perhaps doing now?
Well, I guess, the saying is the 3 R's, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle. Now, those are not all created equal. By far, the best thing to do is reduce, because then you have less to reuse, you have less to recycle. So, if you're looking at doing one thing, reduce it. Because if you reduce the amount of stuff you're going to have to throw away, bringing that onto your property, if you reduce the amount of things that you are going to have to throw away by bringing them on property, reducing the amount of packaging that's involved, then you don't have to worry about composting, what type, plastics and all of that type of packaging. You have to worry about much fewer things and much low. You're already kind of moving up into the higher level, hanging fruits. So, those 3 R's work really well as long as you don't get them backwards. If you start talking about recycling first, that's a big problem. If you start talking about reusing first, it's also a problem. What you need to think about is reducing first.
Very good. So those 3 R's are a great takeaway for everyone who is watching this. So I'm going to hand over now to Abid with a few more questions for you. So thank you very much for your input. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam. Michael, the waste is a big challenge. We've experienced this in everyday life. I can speak from my personal experience, though we've gotten much better at it in YKnot. At this particular point, there is hardly one bag of garbage that gets removed from us every week, where there is a lot of recycling that gets removed. But what are some of the other best practices? I know all of us love to travel, and hopefully we'll be beyond this pandemic before too long, and travel would be flourishing again. As a consumer of travel, as a consumer of hotels, what can I do to better help waste management and reduce the footprint that I leave behind wherever I visit?
Well, I guess probably the best thing would be substitute goods. And the way to think about that would be, say, you got Pepsi and Coke, right? Let's say if one of them was shrink wrapped in plastic, came in a box padded by styrofoam packing peanuts and all of that, and the other came in a completely compostable package, it's kind of a no-brainer which one you should think. And if you are one of the types who swear that they can taste the difference between Coke and Pepsi, the important question would be thinking is, that incremental difference in taste, is it worth that harm of the styrofoam packing peanuts, the excess packaging, all of that type of a thing? And I think even though, when we talk about tourism and travel and hospitality, a lot of it, the mental images tend to be luxury tourism. I think what we probably should start thinking about is a bit more of the camping tourism. When you go camping, you don't bring a whole bunch of stuff with you. And when you forget, for example, one of the biggest rules about going camping in the Haleakala crater in Maui is pack in what you pack out. Pack out what you pack in. So anything you bring in, you need to bring out. So if you take that same type of mentality to when you're traveling, it helps you kind of think a bit more of, okay, so do I really need to use a straw? Why am I using a straw? Unless it's maybe a milkshake. If it's just a glass of water, why am I using a straw? Is it because I think that the glass wasn't cleaned? And if the glass wasn't cleaned, why should I actually be drinking it? So all of those kinds of thought processes about, what am I doing? It comes even down into your electronics choices and how some of our infrastructure has changed. Think about what would happen and how complex your life would be if your smartphone required disposable batteries rather than the electrification of just plugging it into a wall and having it fill up. So there's the downsides of, rare earth minerals and all of that type of a mining, but by doing that and having it using existing infrastructure that comes through walls and lines that are already set up, the electrification of it, we're reducing a massive amount of electronic waste, batteries, all of those types of things that are actually kind of harmful. So, again, I'd say that kind of mindset of the camper mindset, what you bring with you, you take out.
I think that's an excellent point, quite candidly. As a consumer, we still have a lot to learn. And personally speaking, I didn't realize that fashion industry and garment industry, fast fashion, was one of the largest polluters on the environment. And since I have known that, I'm obviously a little more careful as to how it's done. Now, there are businesses that have been set up that will help you recycle some of this stuff, but everything we do in our daily lives impacts this. So thank you for sharing your insight, Michael. Stay with us. We'll be right back with you. But at this particular point, I want to bring in our next guest, Jeff Smith, who is Vice President for Sustainability with Six Senses Hotels, Resorts, Spas. Jeff, welcome to Hospitality Talks.
Hi, Abid. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for taking the time to join us. Jeff, Six Senses has been in a leadership role relative to sustainability. So help us understand the culture. How is it that culture has been nurtured within the organization for a long time?
Sure. I mean, it's a good question because I think it's really important for any hotel brand who's serious about sustainability is to really generate this culture of caring about sustainability, of making it something that's forefront and not an add-on to the way that the hotel is run, but actually core to running the hotel and embedded into the operations of every department. So we have processes to do that. Like team events, you kind of team building events where we go out and help in the local community or help with the local environment. and training around sustainability that we run. And it's built into our management processes, and our review process has a component around sustainability performance.
Jeff, we were talking about measurements. Any key matrices that you can shed light on that you guys measure, and there has been an improvement over a period of time?
Yeah, I mean, we track a few data points around sustainability. We have like monthly data that we track on all of our energy, water, and waste. We also track some fun stats in that, for example, how much compost we produce, how many products we can upcycle out of our used glass, how many products we can upcycle out of our used timber or wood products. We also track, and we're going to talk about plastic, I'm sure, in a moment. We track how many pieces of plastic we can eliminate through our properties. So yeah, quite a few. And of course, there's always anecdotal stories that come out of those, but I think what's more important, and going all the way back to the beginning of our talk and what Stewart was going over, is really looking at the bigger data and trends on energy, water, and waste, and trying to help hotels understand the opportunities to reduce their energy or their water or waste, and always tying it back to the financial returns that are built into that as well.
Well, I think, thank you for that. You brought up plastics, and I know Sixth Senses has our target to be plastic-free by 2022. Can you shed some light on that target? It seems like a pretty aggressive target. Tell us how that came about, what type of initiatives have been put into place that are helping you achieve that target.
Sure. Yeah. So Plastic Free 2022 is it's our revised strategy around plastic. I guess it goes all the way back to the origins of our brand, which is more than 20 years old. We've never had the single-use shampoo amenity bottles. We got rid of all of our plastic water bottles in 2003. We got rid of our plastic straws in 2016. And in that time, the world has really woken up to this issue of plastic, which is fantastic, and that's great. We, of course, our aim is to be a leader on sustainability. So we took a really deep dive into all the science around plastic and the impacts on the environment and where plastic comes from and all that, those sort of things. And we made this really bold decision to, rather than taking one more incremental step forward on plastic, what do we eliminate next? We decided, why have any plastic? And that's actually our aim, is to be completely free of all plastic in our operations in the year 2022. Our priority is single-use plastic, but actually we want to push it as far as we can and eliminate every single piece of plastic, if possible, from our operations.
Jeff, when you think about plastic, particularly in hotels, water bottles are the first thing that come to mind, or single-use amenity bottles come to mind. Tell us some of the things that we might not even think about when we think about plastic use in our operations.
Sure, and yeah, you're right. Those come to mind. They're literally in your face. Plastic straws, plastic water bottles. We interact with them, so they're pretty obvious. What we did is, and in 2018, kind of rolling out this revised strategy, Plastic Free 2022, we did an inventory of all the pieces of plastic in our hotels and spas and our offices. So literally walking around with clipboards, looking around, counting all the pieces of plastic we could find, and yeah, we learned a lot from that, and we've gone through that data again recently to kind of update our strategy and our implementation. And one of the things we saw was, packaging. Packaging plays a huge role in the plastic that comes into a hotel, and it's completely unseen by the guests, right? Well, not completely, but mostly. I think a great example from Michael earlier was, vegetables, single-wrapped vegetables that come in, which are so wasteful. Absolutely hit it on the head in terms of not just the material cost, but the manning cost to the hotel to unwrap all those things and manage that material and move it around the hotel just to get rid of it. So yeah, packaging plays a huge role. We're also looking at things like if there's an opportunity to get, a metal bucket or a wooden broom instead of a plastic bucket or plastic broom. We're looking at all those kinds of opportunities to eliminate plastic. And it's because we're not only looking at this as a waste management issue, which of course it is, but looking at the product life cycle impacts of these plastic items and understanding where does plastic come from, the fossil fuel extraction phase, the manufacturing phase, the processing, the transportation, and knowing that there's leakage of plastic into the environment through all those phases. And ultimately, if we're going to stick to the Paris agreements and the 1.5 degrees Celsius targets that the whole world has agreed to, these fossil fuels have to stay in the ground, which means we can't create any more virgin plastics. And plastic really is, when you really dive into this and understand where it comes from, plastic is a climate issue as well as a waste management issue.
You talked about the impact on the entire cycle and keeping that in mind, from production to transportation to consumption, and then if there is recycling to be had. I think that's a great way to look at it, but we've all gotten used to the creature comforts, particularly in hospitality, quite candidly. I don't know if I feel 100% comfortable using a glass bottle of water versus a plastic bottle of water, because I know it has not been used or it's particularly sanitized. How have you educated the guests relative to reduction in plastics and educated your teams?
It's a really valid point, and it's interesting if you kind of roll that back and think about the origins of that question. Back in the 1970s, the plastics companies, which is really the fossil fuel companies, petrochemical industry, had a huge PR campaign to educate people, to re-educate people to accept plastics, to condition us to feel okay about a throwaway culture, and that sort of thing. I think it's a very interesting that we're at this point now where we feel more comfortable drinking from a single-use plastic bottle than a perfectly clean glass. And the question that we should be asking ourselves is, how clean is that bottle, and why would you assume that because it's a single-use plastic, or if you wrap something in plastic, does it mean that it's cleaner? And is the plastic itself clean before it's wrapped on that item? And how do you know, right? I mean, where does the plastic film get made? And how clean is that factory? But we're all conditioned to think if something's wrapped in plastic, it must be sterile, which is something that I would like to question, and I think we should all question that. Really, to your question, to your point, the question you've asked is, what do we do to educate our guests? Well, not too much. I don't feel that we have to do that much, and I think it's also part of this question of luxury hospitality, which is of course the segment that we're in with Six Senses, and that's we would never serve our guests food and give them a plastic fork and knife, right? It's nice silverware, and that same thinking we try to apply to everything we do. Single-use plastic is cheap; it's not luxury, and I think that feeling permeates still enough through our guests' frame of mind that it's not that hard to understand that we want better than plastic items.
And you are absolutely correct. Plastic is one of the largest pollutant, but it is deemed very convenient, and we've all gotten used to it. I remember when National Geographic had their cover story with a plastic bag and just a corner of the bag sticking out from ocean water, looking like an iceberg, where a majority of it was below water. It is still a huge challenge. I will turn it over to Sam here in a little bit. Are you well on your way on achieving your 2022 target? What sorts of hurdles have you come across as you are progressing towards that goal?
I wouldn't say we're well on our way. And we knew when we set this as our goal that it was an impossibly high bar to reach. which is partly why we set it so high. Is we wanted to try to push it absolutely as far as we can. Understanding the human health impacts of plastics, the wildlife impacts of plastics, and where it comes from, and everything I've mentioned, and also understanding our brand positioning. We already had and still have a preference for natural materials. We build our hotels with a lot of wood and stone, and so plastic is a bit of a sweetheart issue for us to begin with, but we still decided that based on the impacts that it creates through the product life cycle, that we'd like to question every plastic item in our operations. Are we close to being completely plastic free? No, I wouldn't say we are. We're very pleased to note, and our key metric on this initiative is the number of pieces of plastic we eliminate per year. So that number is naturally skewed towards single-use plastics because there's more of them per year. And that's how we're tracking our progress. So it is nice to see the numbers of items that we've been eliminating. I think the plastic water bottles have been mentioned a few times already today, and we're right now tracking at about 1.8 million plastic water bottles per year that we're eliminating out of our operations or avoiding. 26,000 plastic toothbrushes per year, over 1 million coffee capsules per year. Some interesting things like over 84,000 plastic egg cartons that we've been able to get out of our operations. 40,000 plastic vacuum bags that are used in kitchens. So it's not just front of house guest facing items, but it's also in the back of house where we're able to make these impacts. And that's part of our whole campaign or initiative with Plastic Free 2022 is to celebrate all of these steps forward and to keep looking for more opportunities to get rid of pieces of plastic.
Well, those are some great accomplishments. Congratulations, Jeff, to you and your teams for being able to make that difference. Let me turn it over to Sam, and I'll be back with you. Sam, over to you, please.
I'm sorry, I think I got muted here. You didn't hear me, did you?
No, I can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, let me repeat the question that for the ones who...
I can hear you.
Yeah, good. Maybe the viewers might have missed out on my question. As a company, you are very well versed in social media. Over 50,000 on viewers on or followers on Facebook, and then a staggering amount, over 100,000 followers or subscribers on Instagram TV, which makes me extremely jealous. So I'm just kind of curious of, after I've been looking at some of your Instagram TV, which is the Instagram TV channel, I was looking for something related to sustainable. I didn't see so much being mentioned there. So I was wondering, what is your strategy to educate your not only your current customers, but your target customers about the great best practices of sustainability in your resorts?
Thanks, Sam. So, I mean, I'll start off with my short answer is that's probably a better question for our head of communications and not our head of sustainability, myself. However, we did have a week of sharing sustainability stories last month. So if you go back a couple weeks, you'll see some live videos that we did share. There's content on our website around this. We actually do more of this kind of stuff in person at the hotel. So I do definitely see as part of our mandate on sustainability is to reach out, to educate, to engage with our guests. And we see it as a huge opportunity. If even just one of our guests, while they're on a stay with Six Senses, if we're able to connect with them in around a topic that's meaningful to them, where we can help them to give back to the environment or the community, or to even take skills with them home where they can live a lower impact lifestyle, that's an opportunity we want to jump on. So we actually have a dedicated space for this in all of our hotels, and we call it Earth Lab. The Earth Lab is a space for engagement and innovation. We host workshops there that are free. Guests can drop in. They're on our weekly event schedule and learn things about what we're doing in the local community or what we're doing for the local environment. But more importantly, to learn skills that, like I said, that they can take home with them. So we'll do workshops where we do things like how to make beeswax wraps, which you can, so by using beeswax and fabric, you can make a wrap that is useful in your home kitchen, that helps you to eliminate single-use cling film in the kitchen. We do things like how to make your own toothpaste, so you don't have to buy toothpaste in those non-recyclable tubes. You know, the list goes on, and I won't go through all the workshops now. And we also have a YouTube playlist of these workshops people can access online. So there is some content out there if you look for it. We don't shout a lot about what we do on sustainability, and arguably maybe we should shout a little louder. But it's definitely something that we feel is important.
Very good. I mean, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning of our broadcast, I mentioned that you're one of the leaders in the industry relating to sustainability. So just a hint to the head of communication, talk a little bit more about sustainability. I think you deserve a little bit more space than on YouTube, the channel, and so on. But because I think what you're doing is so powerful, particularly on the property level, and that's where the stories could be told on Instagram TV rather than anything else. So I'm really proud to hear what you're doing. I'm interested now if you turn to the employees, the associates of the resort, and there are many of them who may have hotel experience, may not have experience, but you're bringing them into a place where the culture is very much related to sustainability. How do you, in the training aspects, how do you go about in giving them that sense of that they are now in the six senses and there is a culture about sustainability?
Sure, and as I said earlier, it's so important to foster that culture. It starts from day one. So with, orientation training, we go through, like I'm sure every company does. This is our brand values, our mission, that sort of thing. And there's a sustainability component to that orientation session. It's important, I think, at that stage to make it really hands-on and not overly complicated. So, we use as an actual training exercise, we use our gardens. Every Six Senses has an organic garden. Every Six Senses does composting of our food waste and landscaping waste. So we use that. We know it's there in every hotel. So let's get up, leave the training room. We're all going to go outside. We're going to walk into the garden. This is where the compost happens. Let's all, plant a carrot, pull a carrot out of the ground, take a bite, eat it. There you go. You've connected with sustainability. And on a very basic, fundamental level, and we can mention how this is full circle, that we get food from the garden, we compost what's waste, we put that nutrition, that value back into the soil, and we've completed the circle. And where's your role in that circle? You've eaten the carrot. So, and that's a simplistic example, and we don't do exactly that at every hotel, but it's important that we keep it, simple, not oversimplifying it, but the worst thing to do for someone as an introduction to sustainability is sit them into a classroom and lecture to them for 2 hours, or have them read a textbook, right? Because they'll go running. So we try to make it meaningful and something that people can relatable, to make it really relatable from day one.
Great. Those associates are part of a community which is outside the resort. So how about the outreach to those communities? Because perhaps some of those suppliers of hotels are from that community. Maybe they are local fishermen or farmers and so on. What is the education or involvement of embracing them to be part of that Six Senses culture, if you will? Yeah,
sure. And ideally, our new hosts or our staff when they come on board, ideally they are from the local community and they would have heard of our sustainability efforts before joining, especially if it's an existing hotel with some reputation in the local community. We have funding that we set aside for local community projects and local environmental projects. And those can take the shape of equipment for the local hospitals, educational programming in the local schools. We place teachers in the schools. We have educational programming that we will deliver by visiting the local schools. So there's touch points with the local community throughout, throughout that programming that we provide. And that extends, of course, because we want to be active players in that local community. We're part of that community. And it's social and it's business relationships. So we also have outreach for our local suppliers, and that plays a big role actually in how we manage waste. So our number one, the top of our waste pyramid is waste avoidance. To refuse waste. We refuse and then reuse, reduce, recycle for 6 senses. And the refusal stage is really talking to the suppliers and saying, no, we really don't want that waste. We don't want that packaging. So we're really big on supplier take-back programs, which works well with short supply chains. It's very difficult to do with long and complicated supply chains. But when it's you mentioned the local fishermen, so that brings to mind some great programs we have at several of our hotels where we work with the local fishermen. We've talked to them about how we don't want to have those styrofoam boxes coming in with the fish. And actually, here's a reusable cooler. This is your cooler. We'll put a number on it. It's now yours. Please bring this every time, and we'll empty it and give it back to you. And we have great feedback from those programs. At first, they think we're crazy and they don't want it because change is difficult and it's scary and all those other things. No one likes change, right? But at a very quick turnaround, these local suppliers with the take-back programs really adopt it and love it and want to do more because they immediately see a return on that by not having to buy these single-use packaging items. They save money and their business is stronger. And it's a big success.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to bring Abid back here for the discussion. And perhaps Abid have a few more questions before we bring everyone to the screen.
Thank you, Sam. Jeff, has this pandemic helped or hindered your efforts in reducing the plastics at the hotel? Because the industry had adopted getting rid of the single-use amenity bottles, for example, or not having water bottles in the rooms. But I understand that some of that is having to be placed back in the guest rooms just for safety reasons. What have you guys done, and how have you attended to that?
Well, it's a very relevant question, isn't it, right now? There's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of fear. And forgive me for correcting you, Abid, but these things are not being placed in the rooms for safety. It's a public relations response. A lot of governments are forcing hotels to bring back in single-use plastics, but it's important to keep in mind that plastic is known to be a surface that the virus can survive on. Fabrics it does not survive as well on as solid surfaces like plastic. And back to what I said earlier, wrapping something in plastic doesn't make it cleaner. For example, plastic gloves, and in a few jurisdictions, some governments are requiring, not just in hospitality and other industries, people to wear plastic gloves. You don't contract the virus through the skin on your hands. So having a barrier of the skin on your hands does not prevent you from contracting the virus. And in fact, wearing plastic gloves, and anyone who's worked in a kitchen would know this, often encourages or discourages, I should say, people from washing their hands because there's a false sense of security. I'm wearing plastic gloves. I don't need to wash my hands. But if you have plastic on your hands, you're just as able or more able to spread the virus with those gloves on than you are without them. You still need to wash your hands with soap. Right. So, and that's just taking one example, but I think it's important in all of this is to take a step back and recognize that there's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of PR responses to the pandemic happening right now, and it's important to take any measures that are taken should increase safety first and foremost. And if you're introducing single-use plastic and it's not actually increasing safety, you definitely shouldn't be introducing it.
Well, look, I was at a farmer's market this weekend in the neighborhood, and quite candidly, they were handing out plastic gloves before they would let people in to select the produce that they wanted to buy. I personally have witnessed the litter as a result of the masks and these gloves on the streets, and it's really heart-wrenching because I thought we had made great progress. Now, whether it is a perceived safety effect or real one, certainly consumers are gravitating to that. So somehow we either need to educate people or get away from that. One last question, and then Sam, if it's okay, we'll bring everybody in. Talk about some of the future initiatives that Six Senses is looking at implementing that will help the sustainability efforts.
Sure. So, I mean, plastic-free 2022 is our big, crazy goal, and we'll be working away at that until 2022. And I'm sure we'll be working away at it beyond 2022, because it is like an incredibly difficult goal, and it's very unlikely we'll achieve it in that time frame. But we're going to go as far and hard as we can on it. We also have some targets set on carbon and climate. Our aim is to follow within the limits set by the Paris Agreement. Being part of IHG Hotel Group, we are signed on to science-based targets, and that means keeping within a certain amount of carbon emissions and reducing our carbon emissions. We have annual energy reduction targets related to our carbon that we set every year, so we'll continue doing that. And our aim moving forward on carbon is to obviously continue to reduce our consumption, but we also want to get much more involved with renewable generation. Our aim, and I think some of my colleagues have alluded to it already on this panel, our aim is really to be a regenerative business. We want our buildings to be as close to net zero as possible, but even better is to generate more, ideally, than what we need. And in terms, as an organization, as a business, each hotel, each resort, we're aiming to be regenerative in terms of giving back to the local community, to have a net positive impact on our local environments and on our local communities. And that comes through that funding mechanism that I've mentioned earlier, through the partnerships we form, through allocating those funds with local NGOs, government agencies, and to be regenerative in every sense of the term.
That is fabulous, Jeff. Thank you for that. This is terrific. I've taken some notes, and certainly we will follow up on that. Sam, let's bring everybody back together, if that's okay. And I want to pose a question to Stewart, if I may. Stewart, how much of this is sort of the green wash, if you would? How much of it is hype, and how much of it is reality?
Well, I think the reality is there's a lot of greenwash in industry, and well-intentioned as it may be, we need to be asking some pretty brutal questions. And Jeff, you talked about this, about show us the metrics and demonstrate that it's evidence-based. So I think we've got the questions we can ask, but there is a lot of greenwash out there, and a lot of Me Too's. I can do that, but in fact they're not doing it, and I think we've got to scrutinise to a far higher level what we're being given.
Look, the financial institutions, particularly when you look at the Wall Street or DAX or Nikkei, I think a lot of these publicly traded companies, they're being asked to be socially responsible and be sustainable. So in most of the annual reports now, the companies have to report. Are there other things that can be done to make it front and center so that we are encouraged as not only consumers, but as organizations to adopt some of these sustainable practices?
So look, the good thing about the reporting is it's now mandated, and I love the fact that CSR in communities are a core part of at a corporate level. I do think that a key part of this is making the consumer part of the experience. It can be a positive experience, and making them aware of what they're consuming, both in their travel and when they're in destination. And ultimately, I think it's really about, it is about education. It's a core part of helping everyone come along. It starts with kids. The children of the future, they've got the most effective thing you'll ever do is get children to understand what we need to do, and they'll take that home to their parents. So I think we have an ability to be really proactive.
I think we need to sort of clone the thought process from Greta to the entire populace, and that would help us a great deal. Michael, a question for you, if I may ask. During this pandemic, there is obviously a bit of downtime. Is there anything we can do to better educate ourselves, to better educate our teams, and put more focus on sustainability?
Well, I think ultimately probably the best thing to do is think about sustainability as proactive risk management. That essentially what you're doing when you're looking after your environmental bottom line, your social bottom line, you're better preparing your hotel, your enterprise, your organization to manage its impacts. That essentially, a lot in your neck of the woods now, there's a lot of license to operate issues. And if you're not part of the change, you can have your theoretical license to operate revoked. You can be canceled. A company can be canceled if it is not being proactive about these things. So it is truly an issue of survival and proactive thinking about it. That So Six Senses, Jeffrey was talking about that they've been doing all of these things for so long, and now it's kind of coming to the fore. Plastics are kind of in fashion. Awareness of plastics. You can't just turn that on right away. It's something that you have to have been thinking about and have a thought out process and understanding of where it sits in your operations and what you're going to do about it. And I think if I could just jump to one of the questions that you were asking, Stewart, about cutting through some of the greenwash, what I would actually say is probably the best thing you could do is listen when they're talking. And I think probably the most encouraging thing I heard from today was when Jeff was mentioning, with respect to plastic, are we there yet? And anyone who says anything other than no is full of it.
Well, that's the honesty talking, right? So, but in communication and public relations and in media, we all try to spin it to a positive. Jeff, a question for you before I turn it over to Sam. For new projects, how is it that you're able to convince the developers and owners to invest money that might reduce the utilities, that might reduce waste, and really implement some of these sustainable practices right from the conceptual basis? There is always an issue of at the project time of re-engineering and cost optimization, and most of these things go out the door. How is it that you have been able to convince the owners to keep that in and keep focused on these initiatives?
Well, first off, we never get everything we want, and there is always that value engineering process, right? I guess the success in that area is to help owners understand the business case for all of these initiatives. The obvious energy savings, what's the return on investment from spending a little more on CapEx to have those operational savings. It also comes back to, and I couldn't agree more with Michael's point just now about risk avoidance. So, by investing in the sustainability initiatives or spending a little more to have a more sustainable design and construction of a new hotel, if you can avoid long-term risks, there's value in that don't necessarily come back within the first 3-year kind of time frame, but they're still very much valid. And for us, part of that argument is always our brand positioning. Six Senses, our aim is to be the #1 hotel group in the luxury space for sustainability and wellness, and that's kind of who we want to be. That's in our brand DNA. So for new owners coming on board with us, Most of them, hopefully, they've approached us partly because of that. And maybe there's a bit of a moral decision or an ethical decision behind that as well. But it's also part of, let's be honest, it's part of our marketing strategy, is that's who we are, and that's what we put out there into the world, and that's what attracts our guests to our brand, is those values. So it's important for us as a brand to maintain those values, to maintain that identity, and to be able to deliver, because that's what I believe and I hope that's what our guests have come to expect from us.
Absolutely. I believe it was Michael that had talked about the renovation and construction materials that are a heavy pollutant. I know at one point when we were renovating, we had put it in our at least the floor covering, that a big chunk of the fiber in carpets had to have been recycled. So there are things that we can do that would help bring this front and center. Over to you, Sam, please.
Thank you, Abid. I want to take a little bit of a lighter note on this very great discussion about you and all of you. During this pandemic era, what have you learned about yourself during this time? What is your sort of a fond memory now, what you have not been doing before, what you were able to do something, just something special about what has been sort of your take and what you have learned about yourself during this time. So maybe we start with Stewart and then Michael and then Jeff.
Well, I think that there's a common theme, not just in my household, but an understanding of the simple things in life. Connectivity of your family, and being able to reach out to people, and enjoying the simple things like the freedom to walk without being hidden away. So that's sort of my take.
Thank you. And how about you, Michael?
Well, I guess the one thing that I've learned, that I'm simultaneously a better cook than I thought I was, and I'm also a much worse cook than I thought I was.
Great. And Jeff, how about you?
I finally got to start that balcony garden that I wanted to start for so long. So I've done a lot more gardening and exercising with my family, which I've learned is very important. It's good.
Fantastic. Oh, talking about the balcony garden, I also started mine. I got some seeds from Korea about the wild sesame. And these sesame seed leaves are fantastic as part of your meal. So that's what I learned this year. But of course, I have somebody else in our home who's bigger of an expert. I'm the one who's enjoying them than growing them.
Well,
Nice.
Sam, if you are starting another herb garden, make sure you plant mint, if you do decide to plant it, very, very cautiously, because it's very invasive. I made the mistake of planting a couple of twigs and it's taken over the whole thing. So, but Sam, it'll be interesting if we ask the same question to our panelists a couple of months from now. I'm certain that one of their most memorable moments would be this session, this episode.
Of course.
Certainly hope so. Okay, well, what do you think, Abid? Shall we wrap it up for this session? Has been a great almost 1.5 hours we've been here discussing some important issues.
Well, I think we've kept our guests far too long. Thank you, Stewart. Thank you, Michael and Jeff. I know it's late for you. Thanks for participating, and more importantly, for all your fabulous insight. I think our viewers would learn a lot from it. So thanks for participating. Over to you, Sam.
Yes, again, thank you very much to all the live viewers on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. Really appreciate that you have joined us today. And also all the replay viewers who are watching this show later on. So thank you very much for joining us. Now, if you like this kind of episode, we have a large selection of episodes available on YouTube. So just go over there if you were on LinkedIn and press subscribe and then notification, and you will be notified when we are going next live again. So we have a session now coming up this coming Friday. So we're looking forward to welcome you. And then meanwhile, just thank you very much for everyone that have joined us, and thank you the panelists who joined us from Singapore.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.